Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin this morning, I'd like to make a couple of acknowledgements. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our Prime Minister, the Honorable Leona Romeo Marlin, our Member of Parliament, Mr. Siddharth Bejlani, and you, the public, thank you for attending this first Taking Charge Hurricane Expo this morning. For the opening statement, I'd like to welcome to the lectern our Prime Minister, the Honorable Leona Romeo Marlin.
To the visitors and participants, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this first ever Taking Charge Hurricane Expo. I want to thank each of you for taking the time out on Saturday, probably your only day off, to be here with us. As Prime Minister, I hold the supreme function as chairperson of the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, or the National Disaster Team, responsible for managing all possible disasters on the island. The EOC structure is presented in your booklets, and I urge each of you to review the structure, who consists of 10 emergency support functions. As you may have heard via the media, earlier this year in May, a Taking Charge disaster conference was organized at this same location with the focus on preparing for hurricane season 2018, following the passing of Hurricane Irma and Maria. The disaster conference brought together the 10 ESF groups and key stakeholders and featured an overall evaluation of the emergency responses to the hurricanes of 2017, the plans, presentations, and plans that incorporate lessons learned from last year. One of the key lessons learned during the disaster conference is the importance of communicating with the public on matters of safety and security. The Taking Charge Hurricane Expo is one of our attempts to address improving our communication to the public. Using a forum such as this to create a one-stop shop for the community to purchase hurricane preparedness-related items and to obtain useful information via short but effective presentations. A key component of this Hurricane Expo is the coming together of the different sectors, government, non-government organizations, the private sector, and the public, which encourages an overall unification of the community, not after a disaster, but most importantly, before, to ensure that we are all still on the same page as it relates to disaster preparedness. Your presence and participation today, in my humble opinion, shows commitment and the willingness to unite for the best interests of this island. During this Taking Charge Hurricane Expo, you will get the opportunity to hear from a selection of the ESF groups on what they are doing to prepare for the peak of the hurricane season. A special event was added to the expo in the form of a cook-off competition, which will feature selected food vendors whose goal is to create the best tasting hurricane food items dish. Throughout the day, we have a number of participants on hand to give relevant information across a spectrum of areas, including supermarkets, insurances, hardware stores, healthcare, and the well-being of our animals. In closing, I would like to remind the members of the audience, disaster sees no politics. Whatever type of disaster comes to this island, it would affect us all. This is why all hands on deck is needed. With each of us giving our full assistance, we can recover and recuperate within record time. We are all in this together. Do enjoy the expo. This is the first expo, but at least under my leadership, it will not be the last. I thank you for listening.
To continue, I'd now like to welcome to the lectern representative of ESF 3, Ministry of Romy, Mr. Claudius Toncha Boncampo.
I still would like to say a very special thank you to the Prime Minister. I have been in the hurricane business for government for about 23 years. I went through Lewis as a fresh youngster just out of GB. not out of school. And then I went through and I went through Irma, and in between, a lot of blowers and puffers. But I must say, it's the first time that we have tried to structure the organization we work in. Lewis was different to Irma, but the organization functioned also totally different, and the aftermath is history now for us. So, Madam President, thank you so very much for putting it into perspective so that all players are on board, and not only the government is trying to solve a problem that we cannot solve alone. ESF 3 Vromi, we are the ones that they call, in a simple word, public works. But we are more than that. We do more than just public works. And you can see that the responsibilities we have when it comes to the ESF itself are the management of garbage and debris, water management, and when I say water management, I'm talking about the ponds primarily, the flooding, management of the built environment, so where we have structures in place already, and we also do a lot of support, logistical support to the COPI, the ESF 4, which is the fire department, the ESF 5, the police, the ESF 6, the medical, traffic control, and with the hurricane preparedness model, scenario trainings with ESFs, we also do some work, but we also do some work with ESF 7, which was unfortunately omitted here, which are the shelter management. Now, we have advanced preparedness because a hurricane, we know that we're in the season every year for 6 months. If we like it or not, it's the season. So we have made certain preparedness modules and manuals that we work with. And the reason we do this is because it carries a financial picture. Whenever we are put into action by the chair of EOC, it means the financial ticker starts to run. So we have to be extremely cautious how we do this and when we do this. And naturally, modules that we have learned to prepare to see what effect we can have in debris management will also then show us how to prepare and what to activate. But what we have done in our contracts, for example, in our garbage contracts, is that we have built into that contract a debris removal and an early neighborhood cleanup. That's ongoing right now still. We are finalizing the last part now in the Beacon Hill, Coopercoy area, the August cleanup until about the 10th, and then the cleanup will have completed. And people say, but hurricane season starts in June. I know, but we prepare primarily for the peak, which is August, September. I'll give you a story later about Beryl. I was in Dominica while you all were here, thinking that we were going to get slammed. Never saw a puffer win. Designation of temporary dump sites. This is one of the most critical things for us because it brings a very dangerous topic with it, hygiene. When you start dumping garbage in certain areas, you're going to immediately contaminate the grounds. So it is not a matter of just cleaning up the ground afterwards, it's a matter of treating the ground afterwards. And that brings the more difficult part of the job and the more expensive part. So this year, when you saw us choose the two areas that were very critical for us, we used the ball field, we used Kimsha. They were concrete, so there was no ground contamination really. But once we got across the movies there, across rum and peas, that changes the whole scenario because all the leach goes in now, and that then creates a whole different scenario for the ground itself. Same with Dutch Quarter there by the De Weaver family. We use those open areas, but those grounds then can become contaminated because we don't know what's dumped there. We are just picking up and dumping. This is an operation that moves so fast that you have to do ground research afterwards to see if contamination really took place. We hope not because the time span of what we put there is very small, but there is a possibility. We also did the cleanup of the trenches in contract. We, as you know, government has, right now we are busy tendering the contracts for trenches, and in those we have frequencies set so that when the hurricane comes, every trench is cleaned at least 3 times or 4 times a year. People say you should clean it more. I would love to clean it every month, but I can't afford it. My budget just simply doesn't allow that. So we clean to what we can afford. Shelters, that is one of the most difficult things that everyone has to cope with because people don't like to make their buildings available for shelters. And you say, but as government, you should take it. You can't take somebody's building if you're not going to pay for it. We have had people that don't understand the use of a shelter. The use of a shelter is to protect the human being. People bring motorbikes in the shelters, want to fight with the people because the motorbike is more important than a human being. We have had these problems in Hope Estate, where they kick down the doors to put in motorbikes. This is how we behave. So as government, when you look for shelters, you very often have people telling you, I don't really want to do this, you know, it's difficult. And then the other thing that you have to look at with shelters is, can you reach the shelters during a storm? Are these shelters going to flood? Because water plays a nasty game. And I know sometimes if the shelters are not high enough, they flood and people lose more and have more damage to themselves when this happens. Advance notice that we want or we need is 72 hours. That means ESF will have been called. Normally, I am in very close contact with the Met Office so that we have a good indication on what's really going to come and how it's going to come. And ESF meetings are called. Sometimes with the COPI, we are called in, and once we get the green light from the chair of the EOC, we start preparations. We need certain times, because by us, it's not only paperwork, it's really, we physically have to go out there, make extra garbage cleanups, so extra hauls up to 12 hours before a storm. We try to get the haulers to still pick up. They, on the other hand, tell us, Bancampa, listen, I too have a house and family that I have to board up. I too have a business that I have to protect. So you're playing with time margins that sometimes people say, yeah, but they pick up the garbage last minute. If we didn't pick it up last minute, put it in your yard and tie it to your fence. Don't leave it outside, because that's what they did with Irma. We are now 3,000 bins short. We have lost 3,000 garbage bins. And I can't even collect insurance on that. No pun intended. The haulers, like I said, they are the ones that we put it in the contract for up to 12 hours before they make a last swipe at it. And our arguments are, listen, you know the hurricane coming days before. Fix your house and your business days before. Don't wait for the last minute. Drainage channels, we have to make sure that those are cleared. The biggest problems we very often get with hurricanes is people start to panic. And when they panic, they start to cut trees or move debris in their yard. Because they don't have a truck and because they don't want to put it outside of their yard, very often, if there's a trench running behind their house, guess where it goes? In the trench. Problem is the water takes it down. The first bridge it bounces up on, it slams in, it's blocked. Now the roads are blocked. Now the danger is on the road and not in the trench anymore. So there are things that you don't think about, but create a very, very serious problem for us after the fact. We monitor the water levels in the ponds, and we take action by pumping, using the big pumps. You know, Great Bay used to be our main outlet in the past, but that has changed because the weather patterns, when we get wind out of the southeast, the water comes up, and then the water goes into the pond, and we can't really get it out of the pond. So we have 3 pumps, even though one is down now, being repaired again. We have 3 pumps with a total capacity of approximately 120,000 gallons a minute. So we can really pump. But just to give you a little refresher, like what was Lenny? Lenny was 5 million gallons. So the 125 million still shows you got a long, long way to go. When we look at the prepositioning of machines, what do we do? What do I mean? We put machines in very specific positions. Great Bay is a critical outlet for us because pumps can get jammed, debris can get into the pumps and block the pumps, and we might want to open there. Maho, the road going to Beacon Hill. These are critical areas. The hospital road, we got to make sure that we have machines. So what we do is we look for hotels. We put the employee in the hotel with his family, and we put the machine there. Well, that didn't pan out too good this last year with Irma, with Sonesta Maho and Sonesta Great Bay. The machine operators had to evacuate with their family. So it didn't help us with what we thought was a good solution. So naturally this year, the solutions are being looked at a little different to see how we can really help these people. The pump management operators, they're the unfortunate group that has to stay in the pump house or in a very close proximity of the pumps. For Irma, 2 of our operators got the scare of their life because the windows blew in. And it was as if it was a tornado in the Public Works office in Vromi Yard. So they hid in the bathroom, and as the wind subsided, they were trying to go out and use plywood to pound, close down windows. But it was not an experience that I would wish upon anyone because we still had big pumps running, and their responsibility was to make sure those pumps continue running at all costs, not cost of life though. Again, preparedness by civil contractors. We have a lot of contractors, especially the utility companies, that are always laying cables on the ground. Unfortunately, when a hurricane is coming, we force them to close. Now, very often they just go with a backhoe and throw back sand on it, and that's the worst thing you can do because that's loose dirt that is going to wash out right away with the first little rainfall, and the damages to the cables can become severe. But it is one of the things that we are continuously working on, and we try to put them in emergency waivers nowadays, a very strict clause that you have to backfill, but you also have to compact. But compaction takes time, and hurricanes, very often these people leave the trenches open up to 24 hours before, then we force them to close, because closing the trench means loss of income if the hurricane didn't come, and you can't claim it on your contractor's all-risk insurance because there was no calamity. So contractors are very cautious with closing a trench right away. Preparedness, also buildings. A lot of people that are building, when a hurricane comes, they have a lot of equipment and material hanging around. We fly drones nowadays to see how bad it is, so we can give them a notice, listen, you have too much of stuff here, clean it up a little bit, we're in the season. It doesn't work all too well, but at least it is working a little bit right now. Those type of buildings can create a lot of damage to the surroundings, homes and businesses. During the storm, like I said, stay safe, management of the drainage, the channels and the pumps, there in the pump houses, and naturally we're at 24/7 on call with COPI. You notice I didn't say ESF or EOC, I said COPI. That is the fire chief is in charge then, and he, together with the police and the medical, in case there's an emergency that we have to go out on the road with a machine, the Honorable Prime Minister won't be bogged down with that. COPI calls us in and we go to work right away with the machines. After the storm, that's when the headaches really start. I will not go into the stuff of, how you call it now, curfew. I will leave that for the police to deal with, but that is extremely important for us to work here. If everybody's on the road looking, I cannot move my trucks, I cannot move my equipment, so please understand we are sometimes some of the people that ask for curfew so we can work. If we cannot work, it will take us weeks into months to get a place clean. I think after Irma, you noticed that within the first 7 days, we had a good bit moved, so we could have started moving people a little bit. I believe we wouldn't have had curfew if the people didn't loot, but that's my opinion. I think we could have done a lot more, a lot faster, and we lost a lot because of behavioral problems of people, and not because of Hurricane Irma. But like I said, we need to clear. We clear very specific roads: harbor, airport, medical center. So let's say you take the Simpson Bay Boulevard all the way to the airport, to the harbor, and coming down here, and Front Street. Front Street, Back Street gets emergency attention from us. Why? We try to put back in the cruise tourism within days. If we can clean Front Street, Back Street, and the Great Bay Beach, we can bring people off the boats. That has always been the concept of, let me call it the developer of Phillipsburg and the harbor, former Minister Heiliger. His concept and vision was, if we clean Phillipsburg, they will come back. And it is something that has proven us right over all the years. We clean Phillipsburg and they come back. Looting did change the scenario last year, but for the rest, I think, after a month, November, we were trying to get them in by November. We got them in by December, but that is still 3 months after category 5+. I think we did quite well. The temporary dump sites, we try not to keep them open too long, but you can see for Irma how that went. We had dump sites open for nearly 5 months. As we clean at night, and we are running 30 to 40 trucks by morning. We would stop at 12 at night because we had to send home the people, and because of the curfews with the French side, drivers couldn't get over that were living on the French side, because we did use French side drivers with Dutch side trucks. We just didn't have enough truckers to help us because of the damages to their homes and to their families. So there's a lot that plays after and behind the scenes, but as we cleaned up the landfills are dirty again, because when people are breaking down stuff, they're not going to drive to town. It's too costly for them as contractor because the traffic on the road Everybody's on the road. You could hardly move from Coopercoy to the landfill. Takes an hour and a half. They're going to dump it in Coopercoy. They created a complete dump behind the casino when you're going to Point Pirouette. There was a dump there, just as big as nearly as Irma dump up here. That much because the hotels were breaking down over there. And they were not coming over the hill. They were supplying themselves over there with a landfill. And eventually government will be called in. But like I said, we have those things. Necessary clearance of drains where we get confronted. Zegas Gutter places that go underwater very, very fast. And that's why we have the big floodgates now, so we could drop it and prevent flooding. But again, when we created drains here in St. Martin 30 years ago, we used the road as the drain. The road became the drain. And after 15 minutes, the road would have dried up and everything went into the pond. But people have started building behind house after house after house, creating the runoff to become a much bigger problem than was anticipated, especially in the Zegas Gut area, where now the road and the house become the flood area. So we are working on scenarios still to see how that is going to work out, but I don't want to say what has to happen yet because that's not my place. We support COPI, especially police, with the traffic. How can we divert traffic? How can we maneuver traffic, open areas that are one-way and make them a two-way, for example, turn over the traffic? But we do that in very close consultation, especially with Mr. Hout from the police department. Then we go over to damage assessments. Last year, we were busy spraying a lot of buildings with an O and a B, and people didn't understand what it was. O means unbewoonbaar, and B means bewoonbaar. So unlivable and livable. And what we were looking at, if the roof had blown off partially, it doesn't mean to say that you can't live in the house. Because if a bedroom and a bathroom are still covered, you can live there, but you lost your living room. Fine, okay, good. You can still live. But if you have no bathroom facilities at all in the house, because those were blown away, then living there becomes a problem. Because nobody can tell me they're going to jump up 12 o'clock at night and they're going to walk down with the neighbor, go knock on the door, tell me, look, I come to use your bathroom. They're just going to use it outside and they create a bigger problem for yourself and for your neighborhood. So that's the concept of the O and B that came out last year. It wasn't that we were going to knock down anybody's house, but if you had an O, before you rebuild it, we wanted to really check your structure again because there were structural damages, that rim beams were cracked, and so before you just go back and put on a roof, we would really want to see how you're going to do that. That's what those things were for. We also do damage assessment of private properties for emergency assistance and planning. If we believe that the home is damaged beyond repair, we're not going to give you a building permit to rebuild just like that. You're going to really have to go through some things with us. People say, yeah, it's wrong what you're doing, and we tell them, no. When you die, your family will come and tell government, but you didn't do your job, and that's why the person is dead. We have to guard those that don't want to help themselves sometimes. We have to do that. Control on illegal construction. After a hurricane, we were confronted with two things. 5,000 homes damaged, and people started to knock up shacks. Do you stop the shacks? The question is, where do you put the people then? If you're going to stop them from building, where are you going to put them? And these are very, very difficult decisions that have to be made at the top. Thank God I wasn't at the top, because it is, as a humanitarian, I'm a lion in my free time. You see things a little different. Even though I don't condone I don't agree with illegal buildings, sometimes you have to look through your fingers and say, boy, for the time being, you build it, but you're building it on your own risk. Because when time comes to take it down, because we have other homes, feel free to go ahead and do that. But like I said, those are very difficult discussions that the present government themselves will be confronted with. The assessment of the government buildings also for insurance purposes is done by us. We use engineering firms also, and we make a good review, especially when it comes to the schools. Think on the schools that government also owns, the fire department, other entities, tax office, all those things, the annex buildings, and so we have different buildings that we go out and do an inventory on. We also have technical support on call, especially with all ASFs, but more in particular sometimes with the shelters. Shelters might have water issues, sanitary issues, They might also have issues of lighting. So what we did with the shelter is we tried to come to an agreement with, for example, NVGB to donate 10 generators, and we hook up the generator directly onto the shelter, onto certain phases of the building. So we don't need the air conditions on, but we would like light, those type of fans, those type of things that you can still keep the temperature, the livable temperature in the buildings. We also do a major assessment on our flora, our fauna, our beaches, especially with erosion, and our monuments. While we are not responsible for monuments as VROMI, we are responsible to ensure that contractors, while cleaning, don't damage the monuments. Because people go around with bulldozers not knowing that those little rocks over there are part and parcel of a monument. And then you take away the little bit that we still have. So we do put some serious time in there, and then we work with that. We have, over the years, and especially last year, we encountered some serious vulnerabilities within the operations. We were not properly prepared, and I don't think it's VROMI on its own. I think we are now talking the government, but it affected us dearly, and that was communications. Communications was a major problem because of the damages to the infrastructure. Not many radios, portable radios were available when needed. The military had their own system. So everybody was crisscrossing each other. We had a little problem with that. Hurricane passes was a major issue because last year we opted to try not to use passes to make sure that nobody could get out because of previous hiccups we had in 2014 with Gonzalo, where we had 3,000 passes. 3,000 cars on the road, it don't make no sense anymore. Then we can't work. And we decided this year to do it a little different. I think there was a past season, but we still have some work cut out for us with that. Naturally, the biggest problem we had, I said it before, so I'll say it again, is who was in command? Who was the boss? Today we know who the boss is. I ain't gonna lie to you. A lot of them were my friends, and they got mad with me because I told them, I think you didn't know what you were doing. You got to stand your ground when you make a decision. You cannot change because somebody whispered something in your ear. You work in an organization, you have to deal with the organization. And the biggest problem we had was when the power was taken away from the EOC and placed by the Council of Ministers. While all good intent, and I understand the intent, and mind you, Mr. Boseman is one of my best friends, personal to the heart. I mean, we know each other, and we go way back. But I told him, I said, Minister, this is the biggest mistake you're all making. Because you all are looking at it from a political view. We are looking at it from an operational view. We have no politics in EOC. Council of Ministers, it is politics. That is a fact. That's why I appreciated the statement just now. Disasters knows no politics. All hands on board. If you don't do that, you have a problem. And that was a big, big issue last year. There were too many captains everywhere. The Marines were their own boss. The governor had his crew. The PM had his crew. Fire department with EOC, we at a loss. Every day we go and we make decisions, we come back out, it goes to the Council of Ministers to come back and change it. But you can't change things if you don't understand what's happening in the field. And I think that caused a lot of problems and setbacks, not unnecessary. And I understand the position of the council because the council said, okay, what's really going on? That's because the person in charge doesn't bring across the message correctly. The communication that the Prime Minister spoke about. That is what killed us last year. Blame can be given to everybody, but I think lessons learned should be taken on and moving with. Finances and accountability after the fact. Up until this day, I'm being battered with that. Because we do work and we put a system in place. You know, it is hindsight is 2020. But at the moment you're working, I must trust who's working with me. If I am going to distrust everybody doing work for me, then I cannot put them to work. But it is a system that we have to find a way that everybody believes in the system and not some people alone and others don't believe. It is critical for us if we don't get that part in order, because we will then have, no, go back. We will then have an issue to pay people in the end. So it is one of our vulnerabilities that we have to work with and see how we can fix it. Training of the staff, and this last part is gone again. I think the breaker is too small here. The training of the staff and engraving responsibilities and the response responsibilities, they have to come natural. After a while, those of us that work in ESF, it should become normal to what you do. You don't have to say, let me open the manual and check what I gotta do. That can be a life or death situation. So sometimes this has to now really be engraved. So what we do every year is we send people to train at the NOAA hurricane training. This year we didn't do it because of resources, limited resources, and most of the top fellas were well trained already. So we wanted not to do that and give the other groups a chance to go up. And the last thing is we still have to update our plan a little more. There are lessons learned from Irma that we want to portray in the plan again. We have done some, but we are still not finished. We still have a little ways to go. The next thing I want to discuss is areas of planning for the ministry. The quality of construction, new building codes. We are looking at this to see, because when you see some of the buildings that were damaged, it is clearly the blowouts especially. And people get upset when I say this. Contractors love to cut corners. What you don't know, you can't object to. Instead of you take a $500 or $1,000 big window, why pin it with 2.5-inch screws when you should be pinning it with 4-inch screws so it doesn't blow out? When we did some research and back-check buildings, small little screws were pinning windows, so naturally we had a lot of blowouts and blow-ins. The windows were not really put in place the way they should have been put in place. And these are things that we have to start looking at a little bit. Also, the infrastructure construction, the norms and standards that we have to look at. While when we became country, we already had a building code, but we copy and pasted a lot of stuff that we took for granted out of Kyoto. Kyoto don't get hurricanes. And, you know, we got to be careful. We are now trying to work very hard with the Orange County, Dade County standards, because they, yes, had Hurricane Andrew and all of them, so they had some of the big boys. And we are trying to put that in place over here to see how it works, especially those big buildings that use steel, and so the high rises, all the nice fabrication. It looks pretty from outside, but concrete board can't suffice. Concrete board cannot suffice on a five-story building. You got to have concrete. And this is where we put people's lives in danger when we don't address these type of things. But we are busy with that right now. But to get a good product, we need some time. Planning and zoning with respect to areas of construction. That is one of the biggest ills we have had on this island, that we allow people to build all over. And they build too close to the waterways, they build too close to the beaches, they build too high in the hills, and the consequences are that when you start getting hill slides, you got problems in the hills. When you start getting storm surge, places alongside the beach are going to be flooded or seriously damaged. And when you put them right beside the trench, guess what? Just like a river, when it goes over its crest, your house is next. That is nature, that's the rule of law. But you see, because we wanted to allow, and I understand the decision or the thought behind it, we wanted to allow people to use their lands and all lands to the maximum to enhance their wealth, not their well-being, their wealth. But it has had some prices and costs that we have to pay. We have to designate flood-prone areas. We have done that now with IHE UNESCO. We have designed a complete place so that we can sit down with the police and create proper evacuation routes, not only for hurricanes, but for tsunamis and earthquakes and other things also, because those two are calamities that we don't really wonder and worry too much about. The minister that we have today is a geospatial expert, so we are very lucky that we have him and Louis, my boss, who is also a geospatial expert, and we have been able to put a lot of things of St. Martin in layers in the GIS system that we have that will help ESF in their plannings when we are doing things. Scenario plannings for other disasters, like I said, tsunamis, earthquakes, oil spills, the harbor and the airport. And we just did a garbage conference, a waste conference, and I believe with that, I have given you the task of ESF3 in a very short version.
I'd now like to welcome to the lectern ESF 5, and that's the police department represented by Chief Inspector Benjamin Hout.
As ESF 5, we have been doing our plans, and we have been doing training. We got training from Holland. We have a new structure we call SGBO in Dutch, which stands for Staf Grootschalig Bijzonder Optreden. It is a structure that is used by all police forces in the former Netherlands Antilles and Holland. Disaster management framework is a framework that is a structure that provides disaster risks reduction. It has a preface starting 96 hours before, during and after, until we scale down and everything returns to normal. In this framework, we have an international framework where we deal with the national police from the Netherlands. We have a regional framework where we deal with Curaçao, Aruba, Bonaire. And we have a national framework where is the local AOC. And the SGBO, what I'm talking about, is our internal framework. And this internal framework, I'm gonna explain how this have helped us to prepare better than ever. Here you see it. You see that the international is the one green with the Netherlands. Wednesday gone, the SGBO in Holland became operational. So SGBO Netherlands Hurricane St. Maarten is in effect. So we are talking, they have our operational plan, we are in contact, and we're gonna continue, and when we go in the pre-phase is when we really come into action. When we come into action, this diaphragm is the one is being executed, and you see that Curaçao is on top, and that is for a practical reason, because the chief of police them have had agreements that Curaçao will be the one that will organize for us all our support that we need. So the only thing the chief of police have to do is say what expertise they need, how much detectives, how much what we call blue, and it will be arranged. So you don't have to bother, you just will get a WhatsApp, the next flight will have 20 persons, or the next flight will have so much. So all our support will be organized from the top, Curaçao, in connection with all the other SGBOs. That's the structure which we're working. We had the opportunity to try it with HUREX exercises that we had. We had the opportunity also to put it in effect with the threat of Hurricane Beryl, which luckily passed us by. This is a national framework. The police is ESF 5. On operational level, you will have under the ESF 5 the copy. If you open the booklet that you have on page 3 and 4, you will see it. That's on operational level, but the SGBO that I'm talking about is a tactical structure, and that will fall under the ESF 5 coordinator as the chief of police. So I put here the SGBO. You can see that it's fall under the chief, so all the decisions taken in the AOC and all the activities happening operational level with the copy is being passed to this structure, and this structure will set out all activities. Under it falls the local police, the RST, KMAR, also the Detachment of Holland, and all the other supporting agencies like the Marines, VKS, all those in the Ministry of Justice, Prison, Customs, Coast Guard, etc. The SGBO is what I'm going to explain, the method that is being used. You have a commander, you have a logger. Then you have 5 names on the left-hand side, 5 on the right-hand side. Each of these is called a button, and each have specific tasks. For instance, the support, that is the biggest button for the commander. The support regulates, one, personnel, has to roster them in, vehicles, communication, logistics, own personnel, if they are, they self became victim, if they need to be flown out. All those things is being dealt with by the support team. So that button is the one that has his staff under it, and they is executing it. The public audits, normal public audits, traffic circulation. If it escalates, then we will use the intervention. That's a special zero tolerance team. The networks is in the pre-phase. The networks is the one that will check, for instance, with the guest houses, the hotels, how many people they have, if they're flying there out, and how the progress of that is going. So if people is left back, we know where they are and we know which quantities. So in the after phase, then the post phase, they can double check and see if they're still there, if they have to be evacuated, etc., etc. The networks is what do that. The mobility is what you see the police on the road with traffic circulation and escorting. The communication is internal and external. The info is the most important after the support, because there is where each time when information comes in, actions are being put into place. The forensics and criminal investigation always happen after the facts. So that's the last buttons that come into effect. In the fashion I said already, safety and security is for the vital structures that need to be secured. So this here, for the continuation of the operation, we have assigned 2 persons on each one of them. These persons is part of the SGBO St. Martin. That means that both of them can go on vacation, so we have internal rules that regulates it. But vice versa, it also applicable that, for instance, SGBO Aruba or Bonaire, if they have an incident there, can all call our buttons for information, how you guys deal with it, how you do it, what does this mean, or if they need, they can ask and we will fly them over for them. So it is a structure, it's like a network within the islands, and it is very effective. How do we, which method we use? The method we use is called blows and IRS, and it is internal assessment that we do with the blows. You have the policy instructions that is based on talks between the tripartite, that's the public prosecutor, Minister of Justice, Chief of Police, and also in talks with the Prime Minister, with the Minister of Justice, Chief of Police on one, what is priority, and then second, what will be the tolerance that we will allow. It has to do with curfew, etc., etc. The island have been divided in 3 sections. We have a western section that, if you take, for instance, from Harald Jack, you draw a line. You have whole Coal Bay going all the way to lowland. That's the western section. The center section will be from there on more or less till Prince Bernhard Bridge. If you cut the island, that will be the centrum, and all the rest will be the east. And from those sections, we had analyzed all the locations, surroundings, objects, and subjects in it. And out of that, we came with 17 objectives. These 17 objectives, we had used it as information, the IRS, the obtained information. We had translated them into risk. Each one of them has been prioritized with Prio 1, 2, 3, or 4. The condition of the island that we have right now is in such a delicate state that most of them is Prio 1 and 2. Later, when construction starts, we build stronger, then they might become 3. This risk has been translated into scenarios, and these scenarios, again, have been rated on best, realistic, and worst case. The beauty of it is that you get so clear picture that you even have how many people you need for the best the realistic and the worst case, what it will cost, and all those things are in a complete operational plan, and every person knows their role. We have been discussing this with all within the Ministry of Justice, all our other agencies. We have talked with them, we have explained them about this system. We have encouraged them to use it also, and we have offered them also, if they need help, we can be assisting them with writing, because it will take a lot of writing. But it become a standard operation that once you take it, whoever sits on that button, that person knows exactly what they have to do, who have to contact, who is his partners in the field. So when the people come from abroad, they can fit in. And just for the purpose of communication, just now, my colleague Ben Campbell mentioned it. We had already on the SGBO level have all the radios from Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, who all have C3, being put in place that when they have to come here, all channels come in the group that we have here. So communication will be better than ever. And we also have what we call a Gateway 2000. There's a style of repeater in 3 cars that if we put it on the highest point, if you pass beyond that point, you still have communication in case we don't have communication. Because the radios have a line of sight communication, but with the Gateway 2000, which is just a software, if you put that car, for instance, by Harold Jack, and you need to go into Cold Bay, or you put it on the highest hill behind Defiance Hotel, and you need to go down by Westin, you still have communication. So that is the improvement that we have made. And with this matrix, you take everything in consideration. It's a very extinguished, and it's when you work with it, you get fascinated. This is what we have been doing since after we had the workshop, Hurricane workshop here, and we got help from Holland, and now all the islands is on the same level, and that is our state of preparedness.
Welcome to the lectern, Mr. Tazio Bervoots of the Nature Foundation.
Like Rodney mentioned, my name is Tadzio. I'm the director at the St. Martin Nature Foundation. I am from St. Martin. I first gave this presentation at a disaster conference in Trinidad, so that's why St. Martin is listed there. So I'm going to be very brief. I have more video and pictures than anything else, but unfortunately towards the end I do have some text, but I promise you I will try not to bore you too much. Okay, so just to jog your memory, 11 months ago, September 6th, 2017, is a day that we will never forget. So we were faced with this huge disaster that caused not only widespread destruction to infrastructure and then to our lives, it not only caused a breakdown of public order and social services, but it also caused significant environmental damage. And with significant, I really mean significant. I mean, since last year, September, we have been faced with cleaning up the environment and trying to make our ecosystem more resilient to what unfortunately will be the new norm. I don't know if you can see clearly on the screen, but here is a satellite picture that we were able to get from the Simpson Bay Lagoon right after the hurricane. And this is one big mega yacht that is still sunk right off of Port de Plaisance. And this is another mega yacht which was also sunk another mega yacht which was sunk by Ile de Sol. And here you can clearly see, well, not really clearly, but you can see the wastewater, oil, battery acid, sewage flowing from those sunken yachts into the Simpson Bay Lagoon. Based on our assessments, there were about 300 yachts sunk in the lagoon, and right now we still have about 108 yachts that still have to be cleared. So what did we do right after the lagoon, right after the hurricane? The first thing that we did is we actually went down on all of the yachts to clear them. What I mean by clearing, we had to check which yacht they were, so which boat it was. We had to check for the name of it. But unfortunately, during the storm, people decided to stay on their yachts or on their boats, and they went down with their sailboat. So one of the tasks that we also did was to clear the vessel to see whether or not there were any bodies on board. Here you can see me diving. You can see what the visibility looks like. I could have barely seen my hand in front of my face. And we had to do about 60 to 70 of these dives to check to see if there was actually anyone on board and to identify the vessels which were sunk. So I'm checking the whole vessel, I swim inside, and then I come back to the surface, and then I yell to my colleagues in our boat, which miraculously survived, that there was no one on board. What we did subsequently, in close cooperation with Mr. Bonkamper, but also with the Maritime Affairs Department, after we cleared all the vessels and we got all the paperwork in order, we started to salvage quite a number of vessels so that we can at least start cleaning up our wetlands. This is a catamaran that we started to clear in, this was actually the first one that we started to clear in the Oyster Pond area. And then subsequently, we were also involved in monitoring and supervising the clearing of vessels in the Simpson Bay Lagoon. One of the things that we also did was cleaning up our dive sites, which is critical. I mean, our dive sites are also surrounded by coral, and this is actually a dive site that's 2 kilometers offshore, and we found building blocks that were blown by the hurricane 2 kilometers offshore, so you can just imagine how strong the wind was. So we also spent days and days cleaning up our dive sites to make sure that that environment was properly cleaned up. So here I'm picking up the blocks, the concrete blocks, and I'm actually using a lift bag to carry them up to the surface. We also did a big cleanup in the Mullet Pond, which is our most important wetland. And somebody decided it was a good idea to put a houseboat in the middle of Mullet Pond. So we were involved in cleaning up toilets, washing machines, ovens. For about 2 months, we were cleaning that particular area. We were diving in battery acid, fuel, sewage, so it was quite, well, for want of a better term, nasty situation. One of the most critical things that we were involved with, especially after the hurricane, hoping to get our economy back up and running, was cleaning up our beaches, and this was something that we spent a lot of energy in. Constantly we were getting not only from decision makers asking us what the status of our beaches was, is there any zinc in the water that can cause cuts because the cruise ships want to come back, but they need to know what the status of the beaches were. But people were also very interested in going back to the beach. I mean, it's a sense of normalcy that people need. People want to go to the beach. They want to have some type of normalcy after the hurricane. So we made it one of our priorities to clean up the beaches. So here we're cleaning up Simpson Bay Beach in front of Character, and these poles that you see us removing are actually parts of the fence of the airport. We gave it back to them, but I'm not so sure if they used them to rebuild their fence. And of course, zinc was the most important, one of the most important things that we removed because of the damage that it can cause to bathers. Another important thing was, I mean, we don't live in a bubble. This hurricane affected so many islands, so we took about a week break from our activities on St. Martin. Once we got the place as clean up as we could after that time, and we also headed to Barbuda to help them out with their cleanup because they got completely devastated by the hurricane there as well. And we did the same in Dominica, where we actually took a submarine to about 1,000 feet deep to measure what the effects were. And this used to be a coral reef, but because of all the outflow from the heavy rain, the whole coral reef is covered in mud. But of course, on St. Martin, one of our priority activities was to measure the ecosystem, so to measure the damages that the hurricane caused to our coral reef and to our mangrove areas. This is a shark, by the way. It had nothing to do with my just like sharks. So we actually received funding from the World Wildlife Fund to conduct post-hurricane assessments to see what the damage is, and unfortunately, we recorded that we lost about 80% of all our coral reefs. Coral reefs are very important, especially in the face of a hurricane. In front of Great Bay, for example, there is the Marine Park, the Man of War Shore Marine Park, and the Marine Park is critical in protecting, especially the Great Bay area, from storm surge. Areas without coral reef in front of it, for example, areas on the French side, French Quarter, because they don't have a coral reef bordering the area, they had a storm surge close to 15 feet. But because we have the Marine Park in front of Great Bay, our storm surge was about, maybe 5 to 6 feet. So we were able to assess what the damage was to the area, and then to know what we have to do to try and recover the area and, to have it continue providing that protection. Another thing that we did is we partnered with our sister organization, EPIC, Environmental Protection in the Caribbean, and here we are helping them replanting mangroves at Little Key. Mangroves are also critical in providing protection to coastal areas. If you have mangroves in front of a coastal area, they kind of abate the storm surge and stop the storm surge from affecting coastal communities too much. So this is an ongoing project. We have 300 more mangroves that we are waiting to plant, and we've identified areas where we're going to plant these mangroves within the next few weeks. One of the positive things coming out of the hurricane is that we had a pelican monitoring project. Pelicans are very important for the ecosystem, but they're also a national symbol. So we were very happy to see that a couple of weeks after the hurricane, our pelicans came back. And you can see here by the fort at Little Bay that they were actually nesting. So we were happy to see that, that was actually something that started to happen again so soon after the hurricane. We also started back our coral restoration program. So with the help of our partners in the United States, we actually have a coral nursery. So we place structures in the water and we basically hang coral on them. We make sure that they have the optimal conditions to grow because this is what our previous coral nursery looked like after the hurricane. So we actually have about 50 pieces of coral that are growing, and then eventually in a year or two we will replant the coral on the reef. We had to deal with all types of weird things. One of the weirdest, no doubt, was the famous caiman, aka crocodile. We got a phone call actually from Mercedes saying that someone was trying to reconnect their water, and then they heard a hiss and a snap behind them. When they turned around, there was a crocodile trying to eat them. So what we did, we looked at some YouTube videos and we tried to figure out how to catch a crocodile, and we managed to safely remove it and put it in the zoo, and we're now trying to work on finding it a new home. We called it Chris because we can't figure out if it's a male or a female, so we figured Chris is a name that can apply to both. I'm just waiting for the end of the video to show you how upset it was that we had to remove it. That's my mother's bed sheet, by the way. She wasn't happy. And it's still pretty grumpy. I mean, it didn't change. One of the things that happened, because we are so, one of the tasks of the Nature Foundation is to manage the marine park. With managing the marine park, that means that we have to control, there's no fishing allowed, so no illegal fishing, et cetera, et cetera. But people were so desperate for food right after the hurricane that there was a lot of illegal fishing going on in the marine park. So we actually worked quite closely together with the Coast Guard into, increasing our patrol in the marine park, and we actually got quite a bit of people poaching in the area. So we had to step up our law enforcement activities also. So it just goes to show that aside from all of the other things that we do, we had to continue with our tasks that we usually do on a day-to-day basis at within the marine park and outside. One of the main things that we did was increase our communication. So constantly we received requests by the Dutch media, by the US media, by local media to give information on what the status of the island was right after the hurricane, on what some of the environmental issues were that we had to deal with, and because of that high exposure, that constant push to keep people updated as to what was going on, we were able to host the royal couple and really, highlight some of the issues that we were dealing with and some of the responses that we were involved with. First came the royal couple, and then we got a request to go to Parliament to also update Parliament on some of our activities that we were involved in after the hurricane, and to really push for, a quicker cleanup of especially our wetlands, Oyster Pond, and Simpson Bay, because we really saw that as being one of the most crucial areas that we were struggling with. I say one of the most crucial areas, but the most crucial area that we have been struggling with, especially post-hurricane, is the landfill. We have seen an exponential growth of the landfill, also an increase in flare-ups. There is a misconception that the dump is only a problem when you see huge smoke on it, coming out of it, but the dump is constantly on fire. So we realize that it does have the attention of the government, but we need to have a quick resolution to what is the most critical environmental issue in St. Martin at the moment. We did step up our response to it. This was the Charlotte Brooksing Academy, who were housed in a tent directly downwind of the dump fires, so we took it upon ourselves through the support of the community to distribute face masks, which would help some relief for the people that were, for the kids that were affected by the dump fires. Another positive that came out of the hurricane is we see an increase in volunteerism. We are now currently hosting beach cleanup activities with the cruise industry, especially Princess Cruises have been constantly sending groups out to the island to help us out with our cleanup activities. So this was the first group. We hosted 2 groups on this day of about 300 people altogether. So it was a very successful activity. We also got help from Sea Shepherd, which is a famous conservation organization. They brought animal supplies, especially for animal defenders, so that our pets and the animals, especially the stray animals, were also taken care of. And then we actually contacted the Dominica Association. We were able to load supplies, and then with the Sea Shepherd ship, we took it from St. Martin to Dominica to deliver those supplies as well. Just to highlight again that, you know, when a hurricane happens, it affects the region. It doesn't only affect your home, but the whole Caribbean was affected by it, and it's up to us to really provide as much assistance as we can. So some key messages. Health and safety of personnel is priority. I'm happy to see the Psychologists Association here because this health and safety definitely also includes psychological help. I mean, we were involved in high-stress environments. Some of it was dangerous. We were surrounded by destruction. In some cases, we were surrounded by death. So we really had to, you know, include mental health in our health and safety, you know, to look after the health and safety of our colleagues. We also now have a scenario-based preparedness plan. That basically means if there's no communication, we have a collection point for all of our colleagues so that we can come together and then first help each other out, distribute water in our community, but also know what the next steps would be in terms of responding to environmental issues. One of the lucky things that we have at the Nature Foundation, we have good data available from before the storm, so we know what the environment looked like before the storm, so we're now able to easily compare what the environment looks like right after the storm. One of the hard lessons that we learned is to always have a disaster clause included in our project contracts. We had various projects running that were funded by international agencies who did not quite understand the severity of what we went through. I lost my temper quite a few times, but now we've learned our lesson that when we enter into negotiations and enter into contracts, we have a disaster clause that allows us to pull out in terms in the event that we're faced with a disaster. Solid waste management, I've talked enough about that. I'm not going to touch that one. Also important is that in lieu of government actions, so we all know the issues that happened right after the hurricane, we depended quite heavily on international organizations. In this case, the WWF gave us small, well, not small, I would say medium amount of money, and we were actually able to use that money to employ people from in the community that lost their jobs, and they helped us out with our cleanup activities from September until December. So the volunteers that we had, we gave them a stipend so that they were also able to continue their lives. It is also important to include conservation management organization in disaster preparedness and recovery teams, hint, hint, hint. Conservation organizations play a key role in local and regional support. We constantly gave updates not only to government, but also to the cruise industry, for example. They were asking us, what is the status of the beaches? Can we send our ships back? If our ships come, is the water safe to swim in? So we were constantly in contact with them to, basically kickstart the economy back. We found that when it comes to post-hurricane response, in terms of priorities, first is security, then water, food, and fuel. Somebody stole my truck to steal all the diesel in it. So that just goes to highlight how important these 4 items are. We chose to remain relevant through communication in our activities, so we also always had a communication plan associated with whatever it is that we were doing. Like I mentioned, day-to-day conservation activities continue. Also, disaster preparedness and response should be included in our marine park management plan. One thing that we did very early on was we put a dollar amount on our coral reef ecosystem, so we were able to say that we sustain about $50 million in damage to the coral reef and mangrove ecosystem. And then, of course, communicating the importance of natural resource conservation in terms of resiliency is one of the most critical functions. One of the things that we're working on now together with our partners at the Nature Conservancy is developing a parametric insurance scheme. What this means is instead of the insurance being related to a policy or whatever, is that actually an event will trigger a payout of insurance money, and that will fund our restoration activities so we don't have to depend on outside organizations to fund us. I am involved with piloting this in Mexico. I travel to Mexico in the next few weeks to see what the developments are and to have discussions with the tourism industry and the insurers there. And then hopefully within the next few months we can pilot that on St. Martin as well. So if there is a hurricane, the international insurance organization that we're working with will release money to the Nature Foundation so that we can do our conservation activities immediately after the hurricane, and I don't have to use a satellite phone to cuss WWF. And something else that's also very important, and what I would like to leave you with, but I'm sure that my colleagues from Animal Defenders will talk about, is the importance of animals, dogs, cats, other animals during the hurricane. This is Binky. My house got completely destroyed, and while it was being rebuilt, this dog moved in and never moved back out, so now she belongs to us. But it's important that you also look after your pets and to ensure that they're also being well taken care of as a part of your family.
Next on the agenda, we'll go back to how we are prepared as a country under the government section, and we go over now to ESF 7, who's represented today by Secretary General Joy Arnell.
I would like to, first of all, commend the Prime Minister and her team, together with Miguel and his team, for organizing this session. This is, according to me, one of the first that has been done. I thank Tonsher for outlining so much of everybody else's, including his own, of course, task as he presented earlier today. The tasks that are carried out by ESF 7 is pertaining to population care. And it is actually in the disaster management legislation identified as evacuation, shelter, relief, and mass care. And one of the things that we realized last year, for sure, is that it is one of the most dependent ESFs, one of the ESFs that's dependent on so many other persons for it to actually carry out its task effectively. The population care actually consists of the evacuations, sheltering, and registrations, and we have been focusing a lot on the aspect of shelters, and I'll go into that a little bit more, actually more than any of the others, because the others have not been needed as much as we've had to deal with shelters until now. However, considering everything that has been happening, we have been actively preparing and understanding better what it means to do evacuations, what it means to do sheltering in mass numbers, and then also what it takes to do distribution and registration. Evacuation is really to identify areas and routes that we may have to take in case we have to leave buildings or areas, and it also has a lot to do with identifying those safe areas that we can send people to or direct people to. We also have So the evacuation process is understanding, and it's important, I want to say it's important to recognize that it's on different levels. And
One of the ways to ensure that we are prepared is to start preparation from home. So each and every single person has to make sure that they have an evacuation plan for their home. An evacuation alarm system doesn't necessarily have to be a technical alarm system, but just knowing what is that word that you have to tell your family that they have to prepare to evacuate a home or a business or a building. Everybody should have some kind of evacuation plan and an area where they would go to in case of evacuations. Sheltering, I'm going to come back to this if you don't mind. I want to go to quickly. The task also includes registration. Registration is important because it is necessary to know who's there, are they safe, and that we have accountability for the numbers of persons. Whether it is in a shelter, it is because of an evacuation, and I'm turning also to businesses, schools, the administration building, persons' homes. You need to know who was there, and if you evacuated, did you account for every single person that was present at the time of an evacuation or the time of a disaster, any kind of situation. And registration is important because that's how we actually take account of the individuals who may have been in the buildings or in the areas, and we ensure that we have knowledge of every single person. The sheltering process, we have been working on that for a while because it is one of the key elements that have to do with after a hurricane, and it is dependent on a number of players in terms of the government operations, but also in terms of NGOs who assist us with the sheltering process. Prior to the hurricane season, we already start with VROMI going in and selecting buildings, and as much as possible having at least 10. However, we all know that based on the situation last year and the amount of buildings that were affected, we have thus far identified 5 buildings that can be used as shelters. They are stated in the booklet that you have, is Dutch Quarter Community Center, the MPC Gym Hall in South Uward, the Christian Fellowship Church in Cold Bay, the Little League Park in Phillipsburg, and NIPA in Cahill. These have been identified as areas that we can use, or buildings that we can be used to shelter persons in case of the hurricane emergency. During the time pre-disaster, what we do is we contact and put all the ESF stakeholders, in this case is the partners, on the alert of the pending storm, and we start the preparation of the shelters. We open the shelter in accordance to the EOC directives, the directives that come from the Prime Minister, and then we start our registration process based on the number of persons that come to the shelter, and we manage the shelter with the assistance of the Red Cross, the police, K1 Britannia is on board this year, and the different departments within the ministry. We have in the booklet, if you turn in your booklet at any time when you have free time, you could look in, there's strict hurricane shelter rules. It is not, and I really need to stress this because we always talk about do everything else first before coming to a shelter. The shelter is not a hotel. It is not a place where you're going to come and get air conditioning and you're going to be comfortable. As a matter of fact, you're going to probably term it as very uncomfortable, and we really try to limit the time that you would have to spend there. We constantly tell you, go by friends, go by neighbors, go by family, because we assume that everybody is looking for creating within their household and their environment a safe location, and we really encourage you to do so. We have on the table in the back some tips on how to help you, or things that you should look at in terms of preparation. I want to urge everyone to focus a lot on it, because the better prepared we are as individuals, the more prepared we could be as a country. Because if we don't have to go into an emergency state with every individual as such, we can better prepare and help out others. Post the hurricane, what we have is we carry out a number of assessments to see what kind of assistance is necessary. Again, there's a registration process where we want to make sure that families are taken care of, children are taken care of, and then we close the shelter. We really try to limit, we want to limit the shelter of open hours to a maximum of 72 hours. So we really encourage persons to, if you need to be in a shelter, that we look for alternatives as soon as possible. The key support and aftercare, based on the experience we had last year, is that we need to look at what is the assisting persons who have become homeless or may become homeless, because some people it may not happen until after a week or two because they realize that they don't have anywhere else to go. We also look at getting available goods and services to the population, making sure that the basic need items and care is provided, and importantly, we also recognize the need for mental health services to address the immediate needs of population, and this is something that we also, as of last year, have started taking into consideration. Ultimately, the mission for the ESF7 is to create resilient communities by strengthening and increasing the knowledge and capacities of the people of the community of St. Martin so that they may be partners and assets in emergency preparedness and disaster management. And I say this because I think that the more information we have as individuals and then as organizations, the better prepared we can be in terms of dealing with whatever situation that may arise. So being prepared, and I want to emphasize the need for preparedness from an individual and a family perspective. And again, we have some information in the back that we encourage you to take a copy of and to ensure that we can actually have that information spread as much as possible. Let's start with some safety tips. And Tonya basically stated some of these already, but it's just that because we're talking to the individuals, the family, we want to continue to emphasize this. So make sure that the trees and shrubs around your home are trimmed. Clear the loose and clogged rain gutters and downspouts around your house. Fill large, clean containers with drinking water. Fill sinks and bathtub with additional water for bathing purposes, and make plans to ensure that your pets are safe. In the information that we have available, they go into it a little bit more in terms of if you don't have the clean drinking water afterwards, things that you can do. Please make sure that you really adhere to some of the suggestions that are being given, because that's how we can be best prepared again. In preparing your family, make sure that you discuss with your family what can be expected and what to do in the event of a natural disaster. So understand the messages that are coming from the EOC in terms of what kind of hurricane or what kind of storm is coming, understand what it could mean, and ensure that everybody who's part of your family actually has that information. If you reside with someone a family member who has cognitive or medical, physical, or sensory disability, make sure that they also understand exactly what it is that is coming our way and how your hurricane preparedness involve them as much as possible so that they understand what's happening. Understand the vulnerability of your home and discuss where you will go in case something happens. This may mean a shelter, a public shelter, but it could be that you have an agreement with a family member or a neighbor, or that you know, for instance, that in the back of the house you may have a specific building that in case the roof goes, that you could actually go there. So always know what you're going to do. And know, of course, of the approved hurricane shelters in your neighborhood. Have at least 7 days of non-perishable packaged or canned food and juices. We state this because last year, of course, we were confronted with a situation where right after the hurricane that we needed water, we needed relief goods, and we didn't have them immediately. It took us, I think, up to 5 to 7 days to actually have stuff to be able to distribute. But if we prepare as much as possible, if we could ensure that from a government perspective, they could feel safely that people have with them, because they organized it, at least 7 days of non-perishable packaged food and water, then we know for sure that by the time we really get the possibility to have items available to be distributed, that you would have been good up until that time. Have non-electric stuff, because if you have a can opener and it's electric, you won't be able to open up the can. So make sure you have non-electric can openers. We're talking about plastic plates, but cups, utensils, have things that you can use. Have a supply of bottled drinking water. People, it's really 4 liters per person per day. And if in the event you no longer have bottled water, you're using water from the cistern, make sure that you boil the water. Last year, there was a lot of information, a lot of concern because of the amount of people that were using the well water. If you're using well water, remember, you have to boil the water. You cannot just drink the water, because that creates another set of problems that we really would not want to have to deal with. And when electricity is out for over a long period of time, keep the door closed as long as possible. We have the tendency to open the door to the fridge, sorry. We open the fridge, you go in, you say, what is there to eat? And then you start up your study, you look at the fridge for a while, and then you close it back. 5 minutes later, you come back looking again. We tend to do that automatically. At a time when you have no electricity, you need to limit the amount of times that you would want to open up your fridge. And then important is to recognize your first aid and health care. Persons who have medication, from the time you hear there's a possibility of a storm coming, please always check to make sure you have a stock of medication. Last year, we were confronted with situations where you didn't have access to the pharmacy, okay? And at a certain moment, our colleagues in ESF 6 were able to organize that pharmacies could open in different areas for specific amount of time, but it still happened after quite a number of days. And if you do not have that medication, I could imagine that for persons who are very dependent on it, it could become very stressful. So the more prepared you are, the better it is for all of us. So always check your stock, make sure you have a ready-to-go bag with your medication and your other important things in it. It's important that you prepare a bag that is your disaster bag, so to speak. Always have it somewhere close by, somewhere that you can get access to it easily, and make sure you have things not only for yourself, but for your children and everybody who's in the household. Additionally, as it pertains to engaging the children of your family, make sure you have items that you can keep your children occupied. For children, it's also very, very stressful. I'm sure that UNICEF, the Department of Education, Youth and Sports, along with APAP, could attest to that. Children suffer a lot psychologically from the effects of the hurricane, but the more prepared you are with them or keeping them occupied, the better. So we want to stress on being prepared. Again, the ESF 7 hurricane shelter information is in your booklet, and we just want to ensure you that open government and public shelters is not the only way to shelter. You can organize shelters in smaller areas, whether it's in homes or by families. We know that churches do it, and it is to make sure that we have the information that we provided, as long as you walk and be responsible for that which you have, which is really about your own care. If you take care of that, it would help tremendously in us being organized and being able to shelter persons. I thank you.